Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about a really funky effort by the Department of Justice to gather information from private doctors and hospitals that provide gender-related treatments to minors. So they have sent out a flurry of subpoenas to places that on their own, this is not public kinds of facilities at all, except every facility does take public money that purports to be at least part of the leverage, where they just want to know all kinds of information about the provision of gender-related treatment to minors. We're talking about trans surgery and the like, the kind of thing they've permitted states to outlaw, most recently in the Skermeti case, that the Supreme Court decided a few weeks back. But remember, all of this stuff, including starting with abortion and the Dobbs decision, Trump's take on it has been, we're going to leave it to the states. And now it's back with the states. That's where it should be, not here. There is an obvious U.S. countrywide move to just get at any kind of treatment of prospective trans patients who are typically at the point of puberty and get certain blocking drugs in order to permit them to transition to another gender. And if they don't get them, they won't be able to. And that will be permanent. And there's all kinds of data about the terrible suffering that people who are prevented from changing gender experience. There's also, to be fair, a cohort of 5 or 10%, say, of persons who do transition who wind up regretting it. All of that, to my mind, to many people's minds, creates a real argument and decision to leave this to the parents, the children, and the doctors. And Tennessee refused to do that, and the Supreme Court said, okay, and now the DOJ is wading into the fray, trying to basically, I think, intimidate private providers who have these services. It is working, by the way. There are already 2 units in the country, one in Pittsburgh, my hometown, that have just shut down because as so often with the Trump administration, it is just not worth the trouble. But let me say, as an alum of DOJ, this is both perplexing and troubling. What is the possible argument that justifies the Department of Justice sending out these kinds of subpoenas and scaring hospitals to death and trying to keep them from actually offering on their own terms this kind of surgery? Now, we have a order from the President Trump at the end of January that is obviously a broadside attack against this whole any kinds of surgery on young persons, adolescents, to permit gender changes. So here is the first paragraph. Across the country today, medical professionals are maiming and sterilizing a growing number of impressionable children under the radical and false claim that adults can change a child's sex through a series of irreversible medical intervention. This dangerous trend will be a stain on our nation's history, and it must end. So this is very clearly a sort of declaration of war, not in support of states' decisions to do it as they will, but rather as against any state that chooses to permit this. And what the hell business does the Department of Justice have wading into this fray and sending out subpoenas? The argument is that these private providers are committing healthcare fraud. That's a single sentence in this press release, and it's completely unexplained and maybe inexplicable. What is fraudulent about providing this or any sort of medical services in an upfront way. There is some political, ideological argument that the mere provision of this treatment is fraudulent because it is pulling the wool over the eyes of young pubescents to think that it's this, as you saw in the presidential proclamation, that it even is possible. The argument in that proclamation is you can make the physical changes, but you won't really change gender identity. Of course, there's no psychological or medical support for that view. So it really seems to be just a new turn in the administration's efforts to limit transgender medical care around the country. So who sent out these subpoenas? The Consumer Protection Unit of the department's Civil Division. And by the way, it's not simply that it's intrusive, but it's exquisitely intrusive on confidentiality protections which are very robust for any medical information. But this kind of information is particularly has to be handled and by law is handled with real care and confidentiality. But that's something the DOJ is just trying to barrel past. The DOJ official said this is a fact-finding mission, an effort to determine whether any laws have been broken, and a spur to kickstart negotiations with the providers over transgender treatment policy. So really, there are no laws that come to mind. I've never seen an investigation like this, and you can see what the broader agenda is. As with law firms and as with universities, the idea is to try to bully the providers of these medical services into eliminating them, somehow limiting them or reducing them based on nothing, as far as I can see, that is a typical or appropriate mission of the Department of Justice. The idea that there's some kind of fraud going on here, distinctly in this area, as opposed to any sort of healthcare provision, decision by patients, it's just ideological. And so this, I think we should properly think of as just an effort to intimidate along the lines of what they're doing with law firms and universities. Can they bully them into not providing services, as has happened in Pittsburgh, or to somehow trimming it back radically? And all of this, again, is completely different from the supposed stance that Trump advanced for social hot button issues. Let's leave it to the states. This is not leaving it to the states. Any state that decides that it wants to offer these services, the DOJ is now coming after with this starchy subpoena letter that really, if you're legally sophisticated, you conclude, what the hell is this and what's your basis? So we'll see what happens, but it's just one more broadside against civil sectors of society and healthcare providers, no less, who are under very strict confidentiality provisions to try to not figure out if there's fraud going on, but to cow and intimidate against offering these services. I just think there's no other rational way to describe what's going on. So we will see. The 20 subpoenas, certainly some among them will fight them and say you should quash these subpoenas. They have no legitimate basis, and moreover, they trench on patients' rights, hospital rights, parents' rights even, to keep information like this confidential. You know, these sorts of decisions are exquisitely sensitive, individual, and the like, and the department wants to charge in like a bull in a china shop and just make trouble as part of an overall political campaign to take a particular position, not the position, by the way, of the medical profession, the psychiatric profession, which says that there are certainly instances where these interventions and the changes of gender identity are absolutely essential, important. The failure to do them is really has grave health implications for the patient going forward. But the administration wants to take the other categorical view, fight and intimidate and somehow prevent by throwing their weight around and the magic subpoena up top. We'll see what it does, but I predict you'll have at least one real Donnybrook in the courts where somebody comes in and says, quash this. They have no basis here, and we'll see what a court then does and what happens going up to the Supreme Court that's been pretty solicitous of administration efforts to impose kind of conservative positions on hot button issues. But this is part of an overall attack on many levels by the administration on any sort of changes of gender identity for pubescence. And I say pubescence as if, or they say it as if it's some kind of special, but not on pubescence. You have to do it. If someone's going to change their gender identity, they have to do it during this stage of their life or they're not going to be able to. So it really is a broadside against the very notion of it, not medically based, but seems just very political, even, I would say, with a tinge of religion. It's that kind, it's religious views that are hold most that these are really gravely mistaken kinds of interventions. But the medical community doesn't, the psychiatric community doesn't. But now the DOJ is, weighing in on the side of those folks and coming in strongly and issuing subpoenas and shaking everyone up. So we will see what becomes of these subpoenas in the 20 different places. And it's part and parcel of what's going to be an ongoing war against gender identity medical procedures all over the country, not just in red states, not just specifically as paid for by government dollars. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.